Whether or not I am. Good morning, Danny. If people want to introduce themselves in the chat, I would love to see who's in the building. I know some people. It would be great to see who we've got today. Senior Center professionals. We've got probably some town mayors or assistants and town planners, grants managers. So feel free to throw in the chat who you are, what your role is in your community and your senior center, how you're connected. Great to see you, Tommy. Yeah. Good morning. All right. So good morning. My name is Claire Cody. I'm with the Connecticut State Unit on Aging. We are a small but mighty unit within the larger Department of Aging and Disability Services. I'm here with Laura Stauning, who is our staff attorney, and I believe our State Unit on Aging manager, Margie Garunda-Marquette, is on with us today. So just shouting out Margie for all of her support. I know many of you from my previous days in Canton when I was working at a senior center. I've been with the state unit for a few years now and am in the capacity, the honor of being the senior center and municipal liaison. And I've been in that role for about 1.5 years and have been working for about that much time on this project. So it's great to see it come to fruition and to be able to come together with everyone on a Friday morning to provide you with some information about the ARPA Senior Center funding opportunity that we have today. We'll be holding another information session next week. That's on next Wednesday in the afternoon. You're welcome to come to both. You don't have to, but if you feel like you didn't get what you needed today, you're welcome to attend, or anyone else is welcome to attend. We'll be recording both of the sessions and going over, in theory, the same stuff. But obviously, as people have questions, we'll be addressing those, and perhaps it might be helpful to attend or to have multiple people from your entity attend. But it's in order to give a little bit of background. We hope that a lot of you know why we're here today and have some of the history, have been able to kind of keep track of all this. But we recognize your days are very busy and there's a lot going on. And it's getting to be beautiful out. It's getting to be a very busy season. So thank you for being with us today. I'm going to hand it over to Laura to just give you some history on ARPA funding and how we came to this opportunity here in Connecticut. We are going to keep everyone muted for the time being. There are a heck of a lot of people on this call today, which is great. I will be watching the chat, or Laura and I will be watching the chat. So feel free to put questions in there or raise your hand as we go through. We will have time at the end for question and answer. I'd like to think it's going to be enough time for those broader questions pertaining to the project or questions about the beneficiary information form. But obviously, you know, if we run out of time, I can stay a couple minutes after, but if we do run out of time, we can always address those later on individually. If you have more individual questions, we recognize 169 towns, 169 setups and ways of working, and potentially using these funds. So I'm getting a little bit of feedback. If everyone could just make sure that they're muted. Thank you. Yeah, we're just happy that everyone's here. So we will be available later on and throughout this project for technical assistance, and we'll make sure you have all that information before you leave today. Laura, my project manager, co-manager.
Nice to meet all of you virtually. I am Laura Stauning. I am the staff attorney for the State Unit on Aging. Been with the State Unit on Aging for about 2.5 years, and shortly after starting, we were advised that we had received some funding for senior centers across the state, in addition to some other funding that was received for elderly nutrition, some individual senior centers who got line items in the 2022 budget, and respite services and the AAAs. So we've had all of these projects moving along towards getting the funding out. So I appreciate everyone's patience in this. We had to prioritize the elderly nutrition programs. As a lot of you know, they did fantastic work throughout the pandemic, being able to kind of pivot and change the way that they provided meals and services to people in their communities. And they also had to take on a lot of additional financial costs. And so we knew that they had those, excuse me, could some, if you're on, please put yourself on mute. I don't want to be able to have everybody hear what we're talking about. Thanks. Um, so anyways, senior centers throughout the state of Connecticut, under the budget for last fiscal year under federal fiscal 22, the state awarded senior centers, all senior centers, both municipal and nonprofit, $10 million. And that sounds great, but these are federal funds under the American Rescue Plan. And as as we got this funding and started to look into it, we realized because they're federal funds, there are a lot of requirements attached to those. And so it took some time to figure that out. And also we had to do a very complex calculation of how to award funds to each senior center equitably, and also keeping in mind some of the requirements under ARPA. So the allocations which you received or should have received were based on the 2020 census, the number of individuals in your town that are 60 and over, and we also included equity factors, which is a requirement under ARPA. So we looked at race, ethnicity, individuals under FPL or at FPL, disability, and I think that might have been all of the factors, but they've OPM helped us with that. Office of Policy and Management helped us with that. And that's how we came up with the individual allocations for each town. The other part of the process that was fairly complex is figuring out, how are we going to get these funds to you and what can you use it on? And we have been able to narrow it down to two types of expenditures: programming and capital improvements. And in the form that you'll fill out, the information form, it asks you for proposals for either one of these or both of these types of projects, and there's a definition for each. I'm not going to read that to you right now, but just so you know, that's where the information is provided. And you can take a look at that. I think Claire sent along sort of a document that shows you what the questions are in the information form online. And that way you can take a look at it ahead of time before you go on to fill that out, just so you're prepared for what information you'll need to provide, and you can get that together ahead of time. So we've really tried, and part of this is through learning as we went along with the elderly nutrition providers, of how to set up a process. There was only 11 elderly nutrition providers that we were working with, and it was a good experience to get them going first and get them their ARPA funding first, because we were able to kind of see where some roadblocks were, where we would need to amend things or change things for senior centers, because senior centers are obviously different than the elderly nutrition providers. So we really tried to be very thoughtful in setting up this process. So, it's a work in progress. So if you find that there's something that's not working or you have a question, Claire and I will do our best. We tried to anticipate as much as we could, but obviously we're not going to have anticipated everything. We're always finding some new little twist in things. And, we want to be able to make it as easy as possible for you. So the start of that is going to be filling out this information form. Trying to think if there was anything, really critical to all of this. We did provide a definition of what a senior center is. And that is consistent with a previous grant program that we started. I think it was with CARES Act funding earlier in the pandemic, but we figured that would make sense to keep it consistent. And Claire has that up on the screen. And we want to make it clear that it includes both municipal and nonprofit senior centers. One major piece that I want to stress to everyone, and you'll get sick of me saying this, is that because these are federal American Rescue Plan Act funds, they're federally, there's federal law attached to these. And the federal law states that the programming or the capital improvements that you can make with these funds need to either have they need to have a connection to either the mitigation of the spread of COVID-19 or be in response to the negative public health impact of COVID-19. So those are, that's something that's essential. So when you're doing your proposals, be sure to tie all of your, whatever your proposal is, try to tie that in and tie it together. I think people have some really good ideas from what we've seen so far. We've gotten a couple proposals, and it's just that last piece of tying it all together, saying this is what I want to do with the funding, whether it's programming or a capital expenditure, and then tying it to the relating it to COVID, either the mitigation of the spread of COVID or responding to a negative public health impact. So that's another, probably one of the biggest things I want to stress with everybody. So I think we want to leave enough time or adequate time for Claire to go through the application itself. I shouldn't say application, but information form itself. And we can go from there. And, again, I'll keep an eye on the chat, Claire, where you're doing that, and we'll see what we can, and I'll try to answer any questions I can. If I can't, maybe I'll interrupt so maybe you can address those.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you, Laura.
Okay, sure.
It's funny as people are coming out. Okay, so and I am trying to keep people muted as we go along, just so everyone can hear. If you want to introduce, if you're just coming on board, you want to quick in the chat, introduce who you are, what your connection is to your local senior center. That'd be great. So Laura provided a lot of the how we got here, and so I'm really pleased to have been working with her. Since this is a large pot of money, I know that we are focusing obviously on the $10 million pot, but some of you were also earmarked some other allocations. And so a lot of this has been congruently learning and trying to get these funds out. And doing so, within the law, which there are a lot of rules and regulations associated with these funds, but also being really thoughtful and thorough and taking into consideration not only what senior centers' needs are right now, but also, our capacity and everyone's capacity We've gone through a lot of changes at the State Unit on Aging, and Aging and Disability Services has as well in terms of staffing. And so, we're not working in a bubble here. Laura and I work with our finance department. Obviously, Laura's been working really closely with the Office of Policy Management, OPM. There have been other folks who we've had to bring in to assist us and support us in this project. And so if it was only her and I, we'd probably have gotten here a lot sooner, but we wouldn't have known everything that we've known, and we wouldn't be bringing you the product that we're bringing you. So I'm happy that we're here. I do want to pause for just a minute to see if anyone has any blazing questions. Just in terms of the history, why we're here, should you be here? I see a hand up from Karen. Karen?
Hi, my name's Karen Fitzpatrick, and I am the finance director with the town of Woodstock. And we don't have a senior center, so we have a neighboring town, the town of Pomfret, that we are going to be, I guess, designating as our senior center. They also work with a group here called TEAG, and they're like a social service. So I guess my question is, we would fill out the form, get the funding, and then give it to them on our behalf with like a memo of understanding. I'm kind of confused because we don't have like a senior plan because we don't have a senior center.
Yeah, so that's a great question, Karen, and I'm glad you asked it now. In terms of the setup, we recognize that there are some towns here in Connecticut that have one senior center. It's municipally run. This is going to be a heck of a lot easier for some of you in that position rather than some towns that either do not host a senior center, and we know that there are more than a handful who do not host one, or who have multiple senior centers. So Karen, to speak to your conflict, actually, you are not going to be completing the form as a whole, as a town. You'll be allocating it to another community. So you will start to complete the form, but it's not going to be a very long process for you. All that you're going to identify is to whom you're allocating the funds and how much of your funding you'll be allocating. If it's in this case to Pomfret, and Pomfret would be the one actually requesting the funds and completing the entire form.
Okay, so then we wouldn't be responsible for the reporting and things like that. They would be responsible.
They will be responsible. Yep. It's the
Okay,
entity to whom the funds go who will be responsible for the reporting. In terms of reporting, and I know we haven't even gotten to this point yet, but I do want to tell you it's going to be very minimal. Okay. And I've done a lot of grants myself in the past. I know what minimal is versus extensive. It's going to be very minimal. I think the story that we want to tell with this funding is just how useful, just how creative, and ingenious senior centers can be when you give them a little bit of a support and funding and resources. And we also wanted to know that we're attracting people back to senior centers, whether it's people who have utilized you for years and you're just not seeing them, or maybe they want to come back to some new programs or services. Maybe it's to attract folks who you haven't served maybe prior to the pandemic, because we know a lot of you pivoted and served in very unique ways your community and attracted probably new people. So I just want to throw that out there before we get going.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Karen, for the question. Jennifer had a question regarding what was the funding amount provided to the municipalities. If you have not received the allocation award yet, or the allocation chart, I'm going to
put it in there, Claire.
Okay, thank you. I'm just putting our email address in the chat right now. Feel free to reach out to us and I can resend the email, or Laura, we can resend you the email with the full allocation chart. For the allocation chart, there are 3 tabs on it. I think some people were just looking at maybe the initial screen, but just look at the bottom of that Excel spreadsheet. There are 3 tabs. And so each tab has a little bit more explanation, but it's on the second tab where your municipal allocations are located. And I know it does have a lot of detail, but there is a very distinct line that indicates what your dollar amount is. So if you are, and I'm just going to ask people to
taxpayer dollars paid for those.
mute if you haven't already. Or if you,
I'm always so nice about.
thank you. So if you're in a community that has multiple senior centers, it's really going to be up to the municipality to figure out how you or they are going to divvy up those funds. And within the beneficiary information form, there is an opportunity for communities to identify how they have allocated funding to the multiple senior centers. And that includes the nonprofit senior centers as well. So we will review those descriptions and illustrations as to how communities have allocated funds, what their thought process was behind that. And I know we offered a little bit of guidance in terms of things that they should look at and take into account, including the needs of the senior centers, obviously, and their users and their staff and volunteers. And I know Laura's addressing some questions regarding negative impact and social isolation and some of the COVID connection. So with that, I suspect, Karen, that's an old hand, and we can move forward. So obviously, when Laura was talking about the start of your process and the start of the process on our end in terms of our interaction, she really focused on beginning the beneficiary information form. And that's true. That absolutely begins the process of you and us working together to get these funds in your town's hands and to support whatever eligible projects you've come to us with. But obviously there are going to be some processes that happen beforehand, and because we've given you a little bit of time, it's very probable that you already have plans in place and have had some of these communications or conversations. But we've already addressed some things too. So looking at the set of services that your community delivers, that your entity, your building supplies, and validating who is a senior center, who by definition, what is the senior center, how many senior centers. That's part of this internal process that your communities are going to have to go through. Okay. And then obviously, as you have some internal conversations, we are really, really encouraging municipal leadership to talk to senior center personnel. This is why communications have gone out to not only CEOs, mayors, town managers, first select people, but also you guys, the senior center personnel as well. It's deeply, deeply important that everyone is having conversations about the very realistic needs of the senior centers, who you're serving, and what kinds of identified needs you have, and how these funds might actually be able to support you and your centers. We recognize that there are a lot of other ARPA funding streams out there, and towns have been able to get very creative, and that's what we're looking for. We're looking for creativity and ingenuity, but we're also know that there are some very realistic needs in terms of infrastructure, building safety, accommodations, and if something like this were to ever happen again, there are some things that can be done to really ensure that your structures are safer and more welcoming to individuals. So having those internal conversations is vitally important. Going through whatever processes you have to do in order to not apply for, but to request these funds. Obviously, every town, every senior center has either the board or a town council or a first select person or a mayor. Go through your internal processes, make sure that everyone's on board before you go through and complete and submit this this information form. Okay, we want to make sure that folks have had these conversations, have gone through whatever votes you need to go through in anticipation of moving through this process and completing the beneficiary information form. Because once it comes to us, we're hoping that it can move quite swiftly. And as long as everything it looks like it's deemed with an eligible use, looks appropriate, looks reasonable, all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed, we should be able to hopefully get money in hand and beneficiary agreements out so that we can start dispensing these funds. So make sure you have those internal conversations before you get to the beneficiary information form. We did, and I know they've been, Laura mentioned, I sent out the questions that are on those forms, as I know the senior center directors, and this is not a slight to any of you, you didn't get the electronic link. And I apologize, I wasn't more explicit about why, but it was really to be protective. What I don't want is 5 submissions from the same town or the same senior center as people are going through and checking out the form and that kind of thing, because administratively we have to go through each one of those forms. And so if there are multiples from multiple entities, it's just going to administratively take us way more time to go through them. So that is the reasoning behind only sending it to town leaders in anticipation that you guys would be connected anyways. But we did want to make sure that those questions were provided to you, as a lot of you are going to be asked those questions in completing the form. So let's get into, go ahead if somebody has something to say. Move everything around here. Okay. Share. And just let me know.
Claire, I just had a quick question.
Sure.
Will the funds be dispensed first, or do we have to pay an invoice and then we get reimbursed?
Sure, that's a great question, and I apologize, I can't see who asked it. So that's a great question. As of right now, we anticipate that we're going to be able to cut a check. However, as Laura and I both mentioned, we feel like every time we kind of settle on something, or we think, oh, this is in place and we understand this aspect of this whole project, we learn something new. I anticipate between today's information session, next weekend's information session, we also are checking in with finance and OPM regularly. I anticipate that the FAQs are actually going to be updated in the next week or so, and there will be a question, or we're going to address whether this is reimbursement. There may be the opportunity to be like a reimbursement style for some projects and not others, but we're not completely settled on that quite yet. We just got some new information earlier this week regarding that. So hopeful that it's just a check cut and then reporting afterwards. And certainly that's what we're going to support. But if it's a reimbursement, then we'll let people know as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Okay, is everyone seeing my form here with the C errors here because I started filling it out? Just give me a nut. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so if you haven't seen this form before, whether in PDF form or electronic, this is the electronic version of what we're calling the beneficiary information form. There are 2 versions of this. There is this longer version that we anticipate being completed by municipalities, and then there's a shorter version that we anticipate being completed by nonprofit senior centers. And I'll go over why that is in a little bit as we move through the form. If you are a nonprofit senior center, we are really hopeful that you have already started having conversations with the municipality within which you are located. and that you've started having conversations about your needs and potentially how these funds can assist you. And we'll kind of get into but you are going to be the beneficiaries of these funds, and nonprofits will have the opportunity to report directly to the State Unit on Aging regarding use of their funds at the periodic and end of the project reporting. So as you're aware, or as you might not be aware, this is an ARPA funded project, obviously. And so ARPA funds are good for a couple of years or can be used. We anticipate that this is going to be a rolling application process or a rolling review process on our end. So even though we've already gotten some submissions, I don't know if that was very quick for some of you. We also anticipate people in communities being thoughtful and not necessarily having all their plans in place right now. I know it's a busy time, and actually like town budget should be being put together at this point for this upcoming year. So we anticipate receiving these and accepting these forms through June, the end of June of 2024. So Friday, June 28th, 2024 is like the absolute deadline for these forms. It doesn't mean this form goes away necessarily. We'll obviously want to keep and review forms afterwards, but it does mean if we haven't heard from you by this point, we've certainly reached out to you just to make sure you're aware of the funding opportunity, because we do want senior centers to take advantage of this opportunity. But there will be an acceptance that if your allocation will be used elsewhere, where there is a pot of money, so about $1 million that has been set aside for what are going to be called like statewide uses, and that could be a website for senior centers. We're anticipating maybe a statewide Get Back to Your Senior Center campaign or something like that. We've also talked about like a senior center summit. Laura and I are kind of excited about that concept in a couple of years, getting everyone in a room together, physically or virtually or both, and providing some support in that way. So just to note the actual deadline for these, excuse me. So I'm going to run through, I'm going to run through this form. I am going to put like some gobbledygook in here. You will note that the majority of these questions are mandatory. Like, you are not going to be able to move on unless you put something in place. So if something is really not applicable, just put NA, and you should probably get away with that. But for most things, if it's needed on the form, it means that it's needed elsewhere. We're going to be using it either to put together your beneficiary agreement, to communicate with you in the future regarding either the application or the information form, or getting funding to you. So we don't think that we asked anything really extraneous on this form. It was really to identify who we're working with, how the funds are going to be used, how much funding is going to be used, and how do we communicate moving forward. So Laura and I really did a lot of fine tuning and a lot of work to make sure we were asking for only minimal information on these. So if you need any technical assistance, and I know some people already have, just reach out via email, via the State Unit on Aging email, and Laura and I can provide that technical assistance to you up until a point. I'm not very tech savvy, so we relied greatly on our relationship with our IT department to help put this together for us. So I'm gonna pick on Marlboro because I just moved to this beautiful community, and I'm gonna use Marlboro throughout this form as we move forward. If you have questions come up on a specific page, these are set up in kind of pages that you move through. Feel free to raise your hand or just unmute. Otherwise, I'm gonna kind of blab on and just move through. And Laura, feel free to interject, because I'm sure there are some details that I'll miss along the way, or things that you might want to note. So a lot of in anticipation of mostly municipalities completing this, we're going to be asking for the municipality name. Where we've been able to, we've really tried to create put a lot of drop-down menus to make that easier for you. We did not put a drop-down menu for like city and town. Necessarily, I know a lot of you might be in different boroughs or villes or whatever, what have you. So just wanted to make that clear. Oh, Litchfield is in the house. And so for every beneficiary information form, there will have to be an authorized representative. And this is going to be the person who is actually going to be signing the form. So that's part of that internal process that you'll have, at each one of your towns or, senior centers, that is identifying who the authorized representative is. It could be the town mayor or first select person or a designee. That's fine. So we have the authorized representative. I put as myself, CC Unicorn, and there's the opportunity to provide a designee as well. This could also be, so there could be an authorized representative, someone who would normally complete the application, but there could be a designee, and that person could be signing the application as well. We're asking for unique entity identifiers from every entity requesting funds at this point, as well as federal ID numbers. If you do not have or don't know what your UEI is or your federal ID number is, we have provided the active link so you can go and get one. And one potentially anticipated change is that we might not need these numbers for absolutely everyone, depending on how much money you are receiving or potentially receiving, but that's to be determined at this point. But as of right now, we're asking that information from everyone. We're going to need information as to who we should reach out to regarding the actual application. So if there's somebody else who we should be talking to other than the person who's going to sign the application, maybe there's somebody who's physically filling it out and then we have somebody signing it, give us that information for the person. It might be the senior center professional. And we're asking for phone numbers and emails for everyone just as a means of seamlessness, so that we can be in touch with folks. Really not rocket science at this point. This alternate person for communications is not mandatory. This is only in the case we cannot reach the identified person, or you want like duplicative communication sent to two people. I'm happy to do that. We absolutely need somebody in finance to talk to in the case we have questions about how to cut the money to you, how to get the money to you, or once the money is in place, what's going on with it. So please make sure you provide us with somebody who has an understanding of this project or is involved. We give you the option here of identifying how you want to receive funding. If you want to receive it via the automated clearinghouse, like an automatic payment, you do have to make sure that you are set up as a vendor. And then if you are not aware, but we'd love to know which AAA, which area agency on aging region you are located in. That'll be important to keep track. And then this is the potentially sticky part here for some people. For a lot of you completing this form, you're going to have one senior center, one municipally run senior center. If you are a town that has multiple senior centers, in this case, you would be covering multiple senior centers that are municipally funded. And municipally run. So when I say municipally funded and municipally run, it means that your senior center is like another town department. The budget is within it. I recognize, and we recognize that a lot of nonprofit senior centers receive funding from their municipality, or from multiple municipalities potentially. But that does not necessarily mean that you are municipally run, of course. You might be funded partially, but you are not municipally run. So a municipality is going to complete this for the number of municipally run senior centers that they are covering, okay? If you have 2 senior centers that are municipally run in your town, and say even another town is allocating their funds for you, and those funds are going to be divvied between those 2 senior centers. You are still only completing this for 2 senior centers because the funding from another town is going to be allocated to you. You're going to be receiving it and then divvying it across those 2 senior centers. So I just want to take a little time and identify this. If you're a nonprofit filling out your nonprofit beneficiary information form, you're only going to be one nonprofit senior center here. And again, for most of you, it's going to be one senior center, one municipally run senior center in the municipality. Any questions pertaining to that? Because there are no stupid ones. This can get
But
tricky.
are you gonna demonstrate, I don't know if you can, but demonstrate if they do have a nonprofit,
I could do
run
that.
senior
Let's
center?
do,
Yeah, just so you
yeah,
can,
let me do
so people
2
can
senior
see
centers.
what that looks like.
Okay, so for this example, good note, Laura. For this example, I'm going to be a municipality with 2 senior centers. I'm going to have one municipally run senior center and one nonprofit senior center. And let's hope this works. Let's see. Okay. So every municipality, I identify that I have 2 municipalities. So I have to tell the state unit now what my process was in terms of divvying up our allocation, or the allocation of funds that I have, the municipality has, for those 2 senior centers. So here I'm going to take into consideration the needs of those senior centers, the usership of those senior centers, maybe their budget constraints, or other budget, other funding that might be available to them, the safety needs of their users, their staff, their volunteers. I'm going to take all of that into consideration, and I'm going to give y'all an explanation. That's my gobbledygook. I can bullet point this. I can paragraph this. It does not have to be extensive, but it does have to be enough that we have an understanding of the thought process behind those allocations. So there's that opportunity. And I'm going to make the first senior center, I'm going to make that my nonprofit. So this is my gobbledygook name, the street address, which I can't do that much gobbledygook. Good job, Jot Forms. Joy Center. All right, gobbledygook for the rest. So here's my first senior center's name is Amazing Person. Let's be honest, that's what all of you are. I keep putting in a real email address because I feel it'll bark at me if I don't. Okay, so say I got $100,000. I'm going to allocate $50,000 to this senior center, and this is a nonprofit senior center. Okay, so my first site is senior center that I identified as a nonprofit. I provided the allocation amount that's going to that nonprofit senior center. I identified how I came to that calculation. I gave up the leadership information in terms of who the State Unit on Aging is going to reach out to regarding that nonprofit senior center. And that's it for that nonprofit senior center in terms of what information I'm going to be able to provide here. So the message being, thank you so much for providing the information regarding this nonprofit senior center. The State Unit on Aging will directly reach out to this senior center's leadership so they can provide further information regarding their ARPA funding allocation. Good example, Laura. Let's see if this continues to work for us. Yes. So now you see we're on senior center profile number 2, because initially we identified that we're a municipality that has 2 senior centers, one being municipally run and one being nonprofit run. So here we'll start completing our second profile, provide the name. Again, out of fear that job forms will yell at me. Total allocation, we'll allocate the other half. So this senior center is municipally governed. Website. Is this, okay, so this is an opportunity here. A nonprofit, so just so you're aware, nonprofits, the rest of your form looks very similar to this. It's just only for you, as opposed to multiple senior centers. So a lot of these questions are exactly the same on the nonprofit beneficiary information form. This is a pretty simple question, but is your senior center located in a qualified census tract? If you don't already know, you can go. Laura was able to provide. Yes, the municipality absolutely has to provide funding to the nonprofit senior centers. Every single Connecticut senior center is to be funded using these dollars if their municipality takes advantage of it. That's a great question, Beth. So here I'm going to say that yes, I just so happen to be in a qualified census tract. I am open to members and the public. So this is where you get to just give us a point in time idea of what's going on with your senior center. And some of these questions are going to look exactly the same, potentially, maybe with a couple of modifications from the CARES Act project a couple of years ago that Sandy Lubner guided through with you guys. So I'm going to click off. I absolutely provide information and referral. Medical services, I provide foot care. We love arts and crafts, and transportation and medical appointments. That's what I provide. We ask for a usership account, count. If you have an annual membership, you can feel free to put it in there. I'm rolling deep in 700 here. And number of dedicated staff. I'm just going to represent a small senior center right now. My former reality. So just identify, these are the number of dedicated people to the senior center. So I know some of you might be located or wedged within larger departments. So what we're asking is the actual number of people who are dedicated to the senior center. So I'm pretty sure also, right?
Claire,
Yes.
before we get too far along, we have a couple of questions
Go
from
for
people.
it.
So if you want to,
Sure.
I figure we take a break and maybe you can answer a couple of those. Or looks
This
like
is great.
Karen had a question first, and I think somebody else had a question too. Karen, you want to go first?
Sure, thank you. So my question was, when you back up and you put number of senior centers in your municipality, when you're somebody like us who doesn't, would I still put 1 in order to get the funding, or do I put 0?
0.
There is the opportunity to put 0 there, I believe. Can I go back? I should be able to go back. Should I see?
And I guess my other question would be, where would be the opportunity to allocate to another municipality?
Okay, let me show you this, Karen. Let's see if this works. So here we're going to press 0 in your circumstance, okay?
Yep.
Right. Okay, municipalities who do not have a senior center. So this is where I'm, like I illustrated earlier, you have the opportunity to identify the other community.
Okay.
If you do not have a senior center within your municipality, will you be contracting with another municipality? So people could even use this form to tell us no, like, hey, we've got this money allocated to us. If your community says, hey, we're not in a position to take advantage of this opportunity, we don't have a neighboring town that we're aware of, or that we know serves our residents, our older residents, like whatever, we know that staffing is difficult, people have a lot of things on their plate, maybe you just don't have the capacity, you could use this to tell us that you're not going to take advantage of this opportunity. And actually, if we get these, more than likely we're going to reach out and say, hey, are you sure? But also it means if we have this information sooner rather than later, it means we can reallocate those funds or use them elsewhere. If you are allocating them to another town, in this case, you can identify Pomfret here if you wanted to. Okay. And then we also have the opportunity for those municipalities who have received allocations from another town can identify it here as well. So in this case, if Pomfret is completing this, they would have the ability to say, yes, indeed, so-and-so is allocating their funding. And what we ask for here is something, this could be, it's just a PDF. Show us that your two communities have come to this understanding. It could be an MOU, it could be a contract, it could be email correspondence between the two mayors. It doesn't matter, or first select person or town managers, whatever, but just show us that due diligence has taken place.
Okay, I think what my problem here is I don't think I have the right form. For some reason, I have the Connecticut nonprofit senior form. So on all the information, I didn't see those options.
Okay.
That could have been why. Okay, so basically we fill it out to the point where we say we're allocating it to another town. And once that's done, the other town is responsible for coming up with the plan and designating the funds.
You got it.
Thank you.
Of course, not a problem.
One
I do
thing-
want to note that the two
Yeah.
PDF forms that that we had sent out that have some of these questions on there, those forms are used as a reference, but they are not the actual, those should not be submitted at all. They're not actually fillable where you can submit them or something like that at the end of completion. You're actually going to be clicking on a link and going into an electronic form. So if you do not have that link already, reach out to your municipal leaders, or you can reach back out to us and I can provide that to you. Sorry.
Great,
Laura.
thank you.
I was thinking of something and it escaped me. I'm sorry.
Sure.
If I think of it, I'll let you know. Oh, I thought of it.
Okay.
One thing that we are asking for people to provide, or senior centers to provide, is if a municipality agrees to, say you don't have a senior center, but you want to designate your funds to a neighboring senior center that serves your residents, we're asking for something in writing from your municipal leadership to say, yes, we are designating X number of dollars to this neighboring town to, for them to use in our stead. So that's something that we just want to get to ensure that on the back end we can match up. Yes, in fact, say for example, the town of Woodstock is allocating their funding to Putnam. We want to make sure that that's, in writing, everybody's on the same page, everybody knows what's going on. So we can avoid any sort of miscommunications down the road. So and it doesn't have to be anything, fancy. It could just be a letter says this is what we're doing. Notifying
so
one senior center. Yeah.
We don't have to have like our Board of Selectmen vote to designate. It could just come from a letter from the first selectman, or would it be better to have like it voted on?
You
I
have to
think
do
you
whatever
probably-
you have to do internally. These
Yeah.
are good questions. When it
Yeah.
comes to us making us aware, it could be as simple as an email correspondence. It could be as simple as a letter. It has to be explicit that Pomfret is redesignating, or reallocating this amount of funding to this community for the purposes of, supporting their senior center. But you guys have to go through whatever you need to go through. If that's something that your board would have to
Yep.
vote on or whatever, then fine. For the purposes of us, we just need to review that that's all taken care of.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Now, Claire, someone else had a question and I can't see everybody all at once. So if that person who has their hand up wants to chime in, please feel free.
Hi, I have a question. My name's Myra. I'm from the Waterbury Senior Center. So my question is, we have 8 nonprofit associated sites, in addition to the municipality ran senior center. So for allocating to these other nonprofits, would we have to provide like some kind of application to them for them to make a proposal, or can we just make a decision on a municipal level?
How a municipality comes to the decision in terms of allocating these funds is up to them. I know Waterbury is not alone, especially larger cities have multiple senior centers. If it would be in your best interest to do somewhat of an RFP and ask for, proposals from each one of those sites or centers, I think the first thing is identifying that they're all by definition senior centers. So go through your due diligence and do that. If it's just a matter of having conversations and voting with your board or your mayor or something like that, it's whatever you need to do.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I have
not a
one more
problem.
question if I could.
By all
On one of those last screens that you were showing, it asked about how many full-time and part-time staffing that senior centers have.
Yep.
For Waterbury, for example, would I be adding the staff that our nonprofit senior centers have as well, or just the municipal run one?
So for that particular question, that question comes up within every single senior center profile. So if you are identifying that there's a nonprofit senior center, it probably wouldn't be you giving us that information. The nonprofits are going to be providing that to us. So that would be on their form that they're going to ultimately be completing, if that makes sense.
Yes,
You
it
would be
does.
providing us only for each senior center that is municipally funded and governed. You would be giving us that explicit senior center profile information. Within each profile, there's, give us the leadership, the website, and tell us how many, what is your status if you're open to the community, what kinds of activities you provide, and then tell us about your staffing levels.
I had a question also about staffing, but it's kind of the opposite. So we're a very small town. I'm Park and Rec, and I do senior center, and I do a couple other things. So when I put full-time staff, is it acceptable to put 0.5? Like it's just a part of my job?
You would put like your part of yours. Yeah. So if it's 0.25 of your position or something like that, that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Great questions, everyone.
Okay, I think that's everybody who had questions.
Good. And that gave me a little time to go again.
Yeah. And
Because
if you don't have
lost
questions,
it.
and you can put your hand down just so I can make sure I see if somebody else has a question, I can catch it. Thank you.
You have fun things in your name. Not gonna work. Okay. Just going through here so that we're all on the same page. After I went through and provided that other example, it messed me up. Because of course it would. So we want to do this and then senior center number 2. And then this one is municipal government. Okay. This is great. So as you do not have to be in a qualified census tract for this opportunity kit. That's just more for us in terms of identifying who we were able to reach. There is an active link within the form. If you don't know if your municipality or your senior center is located in a qualified census tract, no contracted instructors do not count unless they are on your payroll. So contracted instructors do not count toward your actual staffing limits. Awesome. Okay, so for each senior center, and Laura kind of went over the eligible uses for ARPA funds that we whittled down. And we think that these definitions are really broad and they're as inclusive as we could possibly make them. And they were really based off of the conversations we had with all of you guys. So last year we had conversations with CASP, we had some individual conversations with senior centers who had unique setups like nonprofits and communities that had multiple senior centers. We put out a survey in terms of, needs and that kind of thing. So we came to either or facility improvements that ARPA funds could be used for, and or programming. And so both of the definitions, they're splattered a little bit of everywhere, but they're within the form. They're on the BIF questions form, so you can take a look at them. Certainly people have been reaching out individually with questions like, hey, does this fall within, the working definition of programming or facility improvements? More than likely it's going to. Like, you all are, this is not rocket science. And more than likely what you want to do can be fit within one or both of these definitions. What we really need to see, and what I find difficult when I get these questions like, hey, does this transportation fit within it? I need to see the whole picture. This is important for us to see the whole picture. So part of being eligible or an eligible use is not just, hey, we want to put on an outdoor patio. Like, that's great, cool, we love that. But we want to know why that's needed, why that's necessary, why it's going to be useful to attracting people back to the senior center, and what is that COVID-19 connection. So when we go over these, and I know Laura mentioned it, that you guys are going to get sick and tired of her saying it, but I'm going to say the same thing, is be as explicit as possible. And even though this is a non-competitive, funding opportunity, be explicit and think of this like a grant opportunity. I know in the past when I have applied for grants, I would look at, what was needed, and I would literally bullet point what I had that matched the criteria in that grant. It is okay to do that for this opportunity. And in fact, we encourage it. So if you want to put on an extra bathroom that's touchless and ADA compliant, and you want to use your funds to do this because the number of things, it's probably never been ADA compliant or something like that. We're all working within different and some older buildings, I'm sure. But tell us that it's going to be touchless and that that's going to really mitigate the spread of COVID-19 and other viruses in the future. Tell us that you need more ADA compliance within your facility as a whole, because you see your users coming back and they're using more durable medical equipment than they previously were. Like, the physical effects of the COVID-19 have been very real on our senior center members and our older adults within our communities. So be explicit about those those connections is all that I have to say. I can't say it enough. Be explicit. That's what we'll be looking for is that explicit connection between COVID-19. If you're having difficulty, reach out and we can have a conversation. We want to be as inclusive as possible, but it's our responsibility to obviously be good stewards of these funds. And what we would really hate to happen as a whole, as a state, or within any one of your communities or your senior centers, is for these funds to not be used appropriately and for the feds to come back and say, hey, we need that, or for us to have to come back and say, we need that money back. Nobody wants that at the end of the day. So we're here to provide that technical assistance. We really tried to be broad and as inclusive as possible. And that is also why we're really encouraging people to be as thoughtful and thorough as possible before you get to the stage of completing this form. Because we're going to ask you about this stuff. If it's not explicitly in there, you'll be getting an email, you'll be getting a phone call, you'll be getting a request for a conversation, and it's just going to mean all that more time is needed to review and go through and get these funds out. So your two definitions are here. In terms of facility improvements, those are more of those capital projects, and then programming. And so for the purposes of this senior center, I'm just going to choose one. But just know that if I were to choose both of these, then all these questions that we're going to go through in the next couple of pages would come up for both facility improvements as well as programming. So we're just going to go through and choose facility improvements. Any blazing questions about the two definitions or where we are? Okay, Laura's doing a great job addressing stuff in the chat, so I appreciate that, Laura. So for each project, you're going to provide us a project description. That COVID relation, again, we asked for it in multiple ways. It's annoying, but a lot of these questions have come directly off federal forms that need to be completed or that we need to have in place in case there's an audit. So that's why you'll see some questions asked similarly in two different ways, maybe. I apologize for any repetitiveness, but it just gives you that opportunity to illustrate further exactly what you're doing. So what we ask in these is really, hey, what have you got going on? What is the overall idea behind a project? Tell us what you want to do. And then if anything else, the population that's going to be served, is this current senior center members? Is it future senior center members? Why do you, when do you expect to be completed with this project? The COVID relation, why are you doing this project? What's the need behind it? What kind of a community assessment have you done, if any? And then the project detail, we recognize some of these projects or some of these funds might go to larger projects as a whole. If there's a website available, tell us about the website. If it's a larger project that's being, that's gotten a little bit of marketing. And then you're going to give us how it's related to COVID. Your project detail could also be about other funding that might be used. And this is where you're going to provide us with this information. So this is one stream of ARPA funding. I know towns have received other streams of ARPA funding. And then there are those 6 senior centers that I mentioned earlier who received identified earmarked funding, ARPA funding as well. ARPA funding can work with ARPA funding, can work with ARPA funding. ARPA funding can also work with municipal funding and regular budgets and that kind of thing. It can also work with grant funding, other grant funding. It's you doing your due diligence to see what this ARPA funding can work with. But ARPA funding can be used to bolster projects that have other funding sources as well. So if your $26,000, if that's what it is only partially funding a project, we absolutely understand that. We just want to know what other funding is being used for this. Okay. And then you're going to provide a timeline to us, anticipated expenditures. A lot of these can be bullet pointed if you want. In fact, whatever's easiest to read and easiest to provide to us, you're welcome to bullet point anything in these. We did keep this question in here because I think it's really important. We obviously did our due diligence from the state unit side and the state side in terms of the allocation chart and incorporating as many equity measures as we were able to do. But we want to ensure that communities have this in the back of their head whenever they receive any funding through the state, because I think it's important, not just because it's something that is a hot topic right now, equity, but it's also the right thing to do. So we did keep this in there just to see if anyone's just to ensure everyone's keeping this in the back of their head in terms of equity measures. Are you, or serving particularly underserved or marginalized communities? How you'll outreach to those particular communities if you're able to. And then your community engagement strategies. So this is where you can tell us, how you even came to this project idea. If you want to tell us what kind of a community assessment you've been doing. It doesn't have to be a formal one like, hey, I went out and surveyed 1,000 older adult residents and they all told me we needed this or something like that. It could be based off of your professional experience, right? You all have been in the trenches for the past 3 years. So if it's a matter of you telling us, hey, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I'm needing, this is what I'm feeling we need to support individuals, whether it's a bigger oven in the kitchen or it's, a new instructor, that we're going to contract with to come in and run groups or something like that. Tell us what that has looked like. If you've gone through your board of selectmen or your town council, that's great. Tell us how you've interacted with the town, how you've interacted with your community, and made these decisions to get to this place, and how you'll engage them in the future. That seems like it's in the wrong place. All right. I'm not saying that there aren't glitches with this form. So if you find anything that's absolutely glitchy or doesn't make sense, please feel free to email us and I can try to make changes on the back end or reach out to IT to make more complex changes. It is not perfect, but it is where we are right now. So when you come to the end of your beneficiary information form, I just identified information about a nonprofit senior center, and then I identified a lot of information about a facility improvements project that I want to undergo for our municipal senior center. And so our total allocation was $100,000 when I think I started off, right? But this application or this information form, I'm really requesting the $50,000 that's going toward that municipal senior center that we're supporting. The nonprofit that we already identified 50,000 is going to, they're going to be completing their own beneficiary information form and they'll be requesting their 50,000. But I want the full half of the divvied allocation for this municipal run senior center. So here you're going to be putting in, and they did ask for the commas, the $50,000. So you are only requesting the amount of funding for whatever senior centers you have actually identified and fleshed out information for within your form here. Last page. There are several forms that you should have received with, or that you should be able to upload within this form. Excuse me. One being a budget, which is, and I can show that, let me go through this. And so a budget, we have a vendor profile form and a W-9. Okay, some of these you probably already have on hand or in electronically filed. The vendor profile form is really for entities that receive state funding, so that's necessary. And then the budget is only going to cover the senior centers for whom you are requesting their funding. So a nonprofit senior center is going to have a separate budget, but this budget is going to encompass all of the senior centers that are on this actual that are included in the profiles on this form. Then you're going to have somebody sign, job title, and then physically sign. A lot of us will look like it's a four-year-old doing it. And this should not let you submit until you actually upload something. So what I had before were pictures of my niece, just so that there's something in there. And these have to be PDFs. Ba-boom. Questions? Okay.
Hands up.
I'm gonna
Let's see.
stop sharing and I can share intermittently as needed. How about that?
Okay, I have a bunch of hands up. Can you see that, Claire?
I'm starting to see them go up and I saw,
Okay.
yeah, I saw Mira.
Hi, would you be able to show what the budget form looks like?
Sure, let me find it. Not a problem.
We tried to make it, we based it on what was provided to us by Office of Policy and Management. They wanted it to be consistent. So, and it looks to me to be fairly simple. So it's not super complicated. But I'll let you all take a look when Claire is able to pull it up.
I'm sure I'll be able to. Wait a second. Oh, Lord. Next. Yeah, I think honestly, the budget form, it might be the simplicity of it that catches people off guard a little bit. So let me see. Here we go. Open it. And I think might even be strange putting if you have multiple projects, putting them on the one form, that
You
might
could
take a little
do-
bit of.
I was gonna say, Claire, they could add a tab, copy it and add a tab. So there's maybe for each, if you have multiple senior centers and you want to budget it.
I don't know. I wouldn't support that much, but just
Well,
because
we can talk about it.
we can talk about it, but I would prefer, I think, having them all on the one budget form. Okay. Can everyone see that? I know it's small, but I want to make sure. There's no particular form from OPM that you guys need to complete. I saw that question come up in the chat. Dan.
So there was just so you have the background on that, OPM requested for each line item in the budget a form that State Unit on Aging needed to complete in order to have the funds transferred from OPM to the State Unit on Aging. So we have the funds when they're ready to be paid out. And because you're all under the same line item in the budget, we had to fill out one form for the 10 million. And so we don't need that form for each of you, thank goodness, because that would be a little bit of a nightmare to wait for individual senior centers to get it in before we could do that. So we were allowed to kind of do sort of a general plan for the whole 10 million and get the funds that way. So, however, those questions that are on the form that we fill out for OPM, we want to know what you're doing with the funds, because we have to know in order to make sure that they're ARPA compliant. And it also gives us a record of what your intention was. So when we do have to go back and do a little bit of monitoring, we can see that you use them roughly in the way that you intended them to be used. And if the federal government ever says we want to look and see to make sure that those funds were used appropriately, we have a record of that. So that's why we asked for that information. So you do not need to submit anything to OPM. It's for our purposes, for record keeping purposes, but and also to make sure that the funds are being used appropriately. The proposal that you have is appropriate.
Ultimately, for the $10 million pot, most of the reporting that we'll be doing will be aggregate reporting. And so when we even talk about reporting, a lot of it's going to be like how much did go to facility improvements versus programming, and looking at what kinds of things were supported within each of those definitions. How many people might be reached. That's why we ask about usership and staffing and that kind of thing. Again, we really tried to stay as minimal as possible in terms of looking at these questions and what we were requesting of people, recognizing that there's no, as far as I'm aware, consistency across senior centers in terms of what each one of them collects from their users too. There will be a recording, sure, of this presentation. It's an informal one, but what you see is what you get. If you want a recording of this, just send an email and I can send it to you. We're also having another, obviously, information session next Wednesday that people are welcome to attend as well. So question, just some good questions have been coming up in the chat. Jennifer asked if our allocation, for example, is 20,000. We request 18,000, but then something else comes up to use that additional 2,000. Can we submit a second form for the additional 2,000? Sure, you can. We're not going to support that a lot. I mean, we are going to support that, obviously, because we want senior centers to take advantage of this. I'm not going to support that people like put in for little bits here and there. We really, really would, administratively, it would be really beneficial to everyone if you take the time, think about what your plans are, and try to use the funding up in a couple of projects that you give us all at once. You can take some time and think of what those might be. But just think of the more forms we have to sift through, the more time it's going to take to administratively review these and to get the funding out to everyone.
So someone had a question that I think is worth discussing. I put the answer in the chat. They wanted to review, and I gotta look at this, the obligated date and the expended by date. So
Yeah.
under the American Rescue Plan Act, these funds must be either expended or obligated by December 31st, 2024. That said, obligated means it has to be in a contract agreement. The funds have to be obligated to be paid under either a contract or some sort of agreement by December 31st, 2024, if they're not already spent. The deadline for those obligated funds to be spent is December 31st, 2026. So you have some time to spend those. If you want to budget something out and contract for that and have an agreement for that through 2026, so you can maybe spread your funds out over a longer period of time, you can do that. But we will need something in writing at some point to demonstrate that those funds have been obligated. Even though there is a December 31st, 2024 deadline for either expending or obligating those funds, you will see that we have asked for this form to be submitted to us by June 28th, 2024. The reason for that is because we need time on our end to either make sure that we can review those applications, make sure the proposals are compliant with ARPA, and get those funds to you. We also want to follow up with anybody who hasn't contacted us and said, you know, if a municipality, we don't hear from them, we're going to call them and say, hey, you know, you're going to lose this funding if you don't use it. And if you're not going to use it, or you don't have a plan to use it, we are going to make sure that those funds are transferred into the statewide initiative so we can use it there, because we don't want to send any of this money back, right? So the statewide initiatives are intended to benefit all senior centers across the state. So if we have a senior center summit, like a conference that brings all the senior centers together, or if we do a media campaign of some sort, we could add it to those funds. But we need lead time in order to do that. So that's why we want to know from all of you by the end of June, definitely what you're planning on doing, because the time is kind of ticking on the date at which you have to either spend it or obligate it. Okay. I provided kind of and this answer is provided in the FAQs. If you haven't already gotten them, I'm collecting some email addresses from all of you. We'll add you to the email list just to make sure that you can get that information. And, you know, I think you should have adequate time to make a plan going forward. Okay.
Thank you, Laura.
I don't know
So-
if this is a question that somebody had. I'm just trying to look and see. Maureen from
Yes.
Plymouth. I don't know if this question is for me, but if it isn't, maybe
Yes,
Claire can chime in.
It is. It's again a small town question, but 4 places, and I know we're not the only town who has this, who kind of has a park and rec. And I think it's
I'm
senior
sorry,
centers.
Maureen. I can't hear you really well.
I'm sorry. Is that any better?
There you. That's better.
Okay, sorry about that. It's again another small town question. I know we're not the only town that has park and rec, covers senior center and some other things. So in our budget, we don't really have. I have my own budget, but our town budget doesn't show senior center funding. Can I just
Okay.
fill this out as far as what we internally do? Are you actually looking to see the town budget?
No, we're looking to see how you're going to budget the funds that you're going to be receiving through ARPA.
Okay.
So when you get the amount that's been allocated to your town, that's what that budget will be based on. So say, for example, and I don't know off the top of my head what your municipality is getting, say you're getting $10,000.
Mhm.
You would have that $10,000 and use this budget to show us how you're going to spend that $10,000. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yes, perfect. Thank
Okay,
you.
good.
Yeah, so
Okay.
that's where I was thinking maybe the simplicity of this document might catch people off. I know in the past when I have applied for grants, I have had to show, you know, the first off, there is no match for these funds. So that, you know, for my grant people, grant writers in the room, there's no, oh, we're giving you this and you need to match it or cough up a certain dollar amount to match or anything like that. It's not free money, but this is money, like funding for you to do something with, and there's no match associated with it. But I know in the past I'd have to put, you know, what my town budget is or my piece of the senior center budget is. And so I think your question, your small town question, brings up a few things where I can validate in terms of, does your senior center, does your building, does the set of services that you as a town or an entity provide constitute as senior center? And then really what we want on this budget form, and I don't know if there were other specific questions associated with the budget form itself, but we literally only want to see the dollar amount, what you have been allocated and what you're requesting. So if for like Laura's example, an entity is requesting $10,000, that's what they have been allocated, that's all I want to see on this form. I don't want to see the total project amount and like the portion of ARPA funding. I want to see what are ARPA funds going to be used for. And I know that this is kind of a moving goalpost situation in terms of those capital projects where you might have multiple funding sources and you don't exactly know what's going to happen first versus last and next, and in terms of getting quotes and that kind of a thing. But do the best that you absolutely can. And if for future reporting or like interim reporting, if I do not suspect we would ask for another budget outside of a final budget, but for this, it's just, we're looking for the ARPA dollars and what they're anticipated going for. It might be that all of the ARPA is on one line item for capital improvements or something like that.
Yeah, so I can tell you, as far as the budget goes, this is we're not going to ask you for another budget. This is kind of a estimated budget. I know it's sort of counterintuitive to everything that we've been doing, in life, but because they wanted the funds to go out as quickly as possible, they're not looking at things with as much detail as you would normally. So the budget that's being asked for is sort of a rough budget. If there are variations, say maybe you spend, $1,000 on something in one area and maybe you didn't need money and you transfer that over to a different expense, we are expecting a little bit of variance and how those funds are spent. So you don't have to be down to the dollar or the penny. So there is some expectation there'll be a little bit of variance from what you've submitted. But again, we're kind of going through this and explaining it as we develop it. So we'll try to make it as flexible as possible. As long as you're using it for the intended purposes, I think that's going to be okay. So there's a little bit of flexibility there.
I see. That's a good note. And I think, one thing that we've really tried to be is as transparent as possible, perhaps overly transparent with this project and some of the frustrations that have been associated with it. But we will keep you apprised as we learn new things or if anything shifts. And right now we are starting the conversation more about reporting. And again, it'll be minimal. I think what's important throughout this whole project, especially once a community and entity receives its funding, if something changes, it's not like we're going to go away once the money is delved out or once we review your beneficiary information forms. Like Laura and I are plan on being and anticipate on being available to you guys for technical assistance. So if something happens, and things happen, right? Life happens, new challenges come up, the new needs come up, and other funding becomes available, perhaps before this, after this, whatever, what have you. Keep us in touch, keep in touch with us. If something is changing and you think that you're going to shift how you're going to use these, especially if it's significantly, which we do not support, but things happen, let us know as soon as possible. Do not wait to tell us. That is something that we need to be a part of if you anticipate utilizing these funds in an unanticipated way. And I see Julie's hand up.
Yep. Thanks. So my question is, assuming we get the paperwork done and it's correct and it gets to you and we have the estimates we need to get, if we have a project that we want to get done, do you send out like an approval letter? And then what's the time frame for when the money is allocated, when we actually get it, or are you waiting for the work to be done?
Sure. So, great question. Great question. And some of these things are honestly being a little fine-tuned as we move through this process with other entities, Julie, but that's a really good question. So how we anticipate, right, in a perfect world, how we anticipate this working is you guys are going to go through your internal processes, have your conversations. Somebody is going to complete this beneficiary information form on behalf of your municipality and its senior centers, nonprofits. You either have gotten communication from your municipality already, you've reached out to us and gotten your nonprofit beneficiary information form, or perhaps your municipality has told us about you and we've reached out to you. So that's in place. You've completed your form, you've submitted it. On our end, I can tell you I'm looking at these forms every day. So I'm going into the back end of the form itself. And if there are submissions coming in, we have a review process in place. And actually, we're going to get some support, hopefully, around this process as well. But I can tell you initially, I'm looking at applications or information forms rather. I'm ensuring that everything is answered, that it makes sense. I'm looking to make sure that all of the documents are there and that they make sense. And we're going through a review process between Laura and myself in terms of the documents. We bring in finance in terms of the budget and everything. What we cannot get away with is not having some sort of a formal agreement with every entity who's receiving funds. So there will be either a beneficiary agreement. I think we got away from like, oh my gosh, like a 40-page contract or something like that, because with recognition that we're going to be cutting like 200 of these things, and that administratively there's a lot of work behind that. But we're going to have to put into place either a beneficiary agreement or have municipalities or beneficiaries sign an attestation of some sort saying, hey, this is, the dollar amount that we're receiving, and this is what we're going to be using it for the benefit of older adults here in our community, whatever, what have you. We don't know exactly how long that's going to take. I'm going to say it should take a couple of weeks to review and to engage all the entities that we need to engage, but it might be a few weeks before money is in hand or an agreement is in hand. Yeah. It is very dependent on the other people too with whom we're working and how many of these. We might get an influx one week and then not get submissions for 2 more weeks. And so we do have to take that into consideration where there are some unknowns. Administratively, I can tell you it's Laura and myself right now on the back end of this. There's not a ton of us, which is good because there aren't like a ton of cooks in the kitchen per se. And Laura and I have been working on this for a year now together, and we're pretty coordinated and like on the same page. But there will be discussions that come up intermittently depending on the complexity of some of these plans and technical assistance that needs to be provided. I know, Julie, that's not a good answer. I just want to know.
I did want to add that, certainly, our hope is to get the funding to you as quickly as possible. And as Claire said, there are some like factors out of our control that, depending on how many we get in a particular week and what other, job responsibilities we have that might get in the way, it may be a little bit longer than we would all like. But once we do send it to, we get that agreement back to you, or that attestation back to you, and it's signed by whomever in the municipality that needs to do that, and that's determines on how your town works or is set up. Once we get that back and we can get it to our fiscal department, it's sort of, I hate to say it, but it's sort of out of our control, any of our control. You know, it's at the fiscal department, and that's a place where, you know, it's going to depend on what our fiscal department is dealing with at the moment. So, you know, sometimes they have reporting that needs to be done on a timely basis, and so that might delay things more. I think as we go through the process, we'll have a better idea. I am working directly with our fiscal department and our grants and contracts department. Not that we don't really have one, but some grants and contracts folks who we're working with.
Yeah.
And we're coming up with a plan for this or a process for this. And until we get the first couple and go through the process, we won't have, you know, something set yet. But I think the more we do, the easier the process will get. So those of you who send them in early, you may be sort of, you know, the testing ground for this. So please be patient, and, you know, please know that we are doing our best to get things through, but there will be places where Claire and I don't have any control.
So the approval is really counts when there's either the formal agreement, the beneficiary agreement, or the attestation. That signifies like approval, and we could probably get started if we use the funds to reimburse.
Now, as Laura was talking, Julie, I was reading between the lines of so that's what we need on our end to cut a check to you guys, right? We need to have an agreement in place. You might need something in writing to start going. So what I'm hearing and what we're going to incorporate as part of this process is a formal email or letter. Sure. Yes. I think we'll do that for you guys. That's an important part of the process. And it may mean for some of you, it may be very clear. It may be very clear. It might be very simple, like, hey, all of our allocations going to this one project, one program, program or under facility improvements, blah, blah, blah. We might not have any questions. It might just be, hey, Julie, this looks great. Go for it. Fairfield's lucky to have you. Some of it might be a little back and forth. So what I don't want to have happen is some of that back and forth to be interpreted as, yeah, this is going forward. This is working.
Add that into our process.
We will put something in place, and you'll get something as formal as we're feeling, whether it's a letter or an email or something on behalf of this project.
And I think grants and contracts does have a process for that. And so I'll talk to them about, sending out a formal communication with that regard. That way, that it's been approved. It's, we've gotten your beneficiary agreement or whatever we're going to have individuals, municipalities sign. And then at that point, that it's with our grants and contracts and fiscal departments, and they're processing the payment. We want to make sure that all that it's in place. But that's a good question or good comment, because we can work that into our developing process that we're working on right now.
And I think that illustration also kind of illustrates, it's great if you have been following this project since the beginning and you've been listening to my promises at Senior Center work group meetings and, hey, we're coming, we're almost there and everything like that. Because where we are now with this process and still fine tuning certain things, it's great if you've already submitted, but it doesn't mean that like the earliest, obviously, or maybe not so obviously, it should be said that submissions are going to be reviewed within which the order within which they come into us. So I do want to note that that's important I think it's a duh kind of a thing, but it's not going to be like, oh, this one's less complex. Let's take this first and then deal with this one later. They're going to be reviewed in the order within which they come in and processed in the order within which they come in, recognizing that some are going to be a little bit more simplistic than others, right? But it also doesn't mean, hey, if you scurry right now to put in your plan tomorrow, that it's going to be as fast paced as it might be the process 2 months from now when we have it more streamlined, and we've done this a couple of times. So I do want to note that and just kind of validate, while I have the time to do this again, take time, be thorough, be thoughtful, look at, even the beginning of your new fiscal year, if there are still needs or something like that that doesn't get funded, you don't have to do this right now, but start planning if you haven't already. Holy moly. Anything?
The other
Yeah,
thing
go
that I
ahead.
wanted to mention is that might delay things just a little bit. I'm trying to be completely transparent here, is if we get a proposal and we need to contact someone to say, okay, we kind of see what you're trying to do here, but there's not the COVID connection. How does that's a really important piece to this, is how does this project or facility improvement mitigate the spread of COVID or respond to the negative public health impacts of COVID? And somebody asked a question really early on about the negative impact of COVID, the public health impact to COVID. And some of the legislative intent behind this funding, first of all, the federal law is going to govern how these funds are spent, regardless of the legislative intent. The legislative intent is nice, but the law trumps that. But I do think they overlap, in that the legislative intent was to get more individuals back into senior centers. So older adults who felt isolated and were not going to senior centers felt more comfortable. And if they get into the senior center, they can avail themselves to all of the great services and activities that you all provide. And I think that was the legislative intent. However, when you look at the federal law and what that requires, you have to kind of work that into your plan. And if you have in your proposal, like I said before, maybe a sentence or two that ties that all together, that will be extremely helpful for us, because some of that language is going to go into your beneficiary agreement, which says this is how we're going to spend these funds. And from the legal perspective, because I'm the lawyer and this is the way that I think, I'm thinking, okay, I want to see that language in that agreement, so everyone's on the same page. This is the purpose of these funds. This is how they're going to be used. And if we ever get an audit, for example, and the agency is responsible for this money, and we have to pull out all of our beneficiary agreements, each one of them has a very clear connection and meets the ARPA requirements. So that's sort of the thought process, just so you understand like where I'm coming from. Believe me, if I had my choice, I would have cut you all a check months ago, because this has really overtaken my existence. But I think it's a very worthwhile project. It's just that there's so many pieces, and my job is to make sure that the agency does everything it's supposed to do under the law, and that we pass that along to you. So, I'm not trying to be, kind of hard about this. It is what it is. So, believe me, it would have been so much easier if we could have just said, here you go. Here's your $5 grand, 10 grand, 12 grand, 100 grand, you all are getting different amounts, but it is what it
would have
is.
looked cool too. We could have, yeah, that's the one thing. I mean, Laura and I have respectfully disagreed on certain aspects of this whole project, and but the one
And
thing
we're still
we do
talking.
agree, and we're still moving along on it too. There will be others, but the one thing that we did want at the beginning of this was just to give you all your money and support you, but really, I'm so pleased to have had Laura with me, because having that lawyer, I got my social work hat, I got my former senior center, I got oh my gosh, I love my senior center people, and like, just want to support you guys. And then knowing what exciting other things are happening for Connecticut senior centers right now, this is such an opportunity. And I don't know if I expressed, just how exciting this is at the beginning of today's event, but this is so flipping exciting, like so exciting. So please take advantage of it. But this is the one thing where working together is really, really beneficial, because we've gotten to this point. I think we have a good product, a good process. It's not as solid as we would love it to be, but it's as solid as we can provide right now. And I feel like we've filled today. We've gotten through a lot today. Laura, you made notes of all of those people's email addresses that they were given to us.
Yeah, I'll save the chat.
Recording will save the chat. I'll have that ready. Yes, this is exciting. We're excited to be in this position to support you guys. So thank you, Julie. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Is there anything else blazing? Because we have a whole 8 minutes left to today. But the sun is shining, at least here in the eastern part of the state. I'm glad it was helpful. Next week's will be even more helpful, because now Laura and I will know what we should have done for this one. Probably. Thank you to everyone who's been a guinea pig thus far, or who has provided us input regarding this whole project and process. It is really nice to see familiar faces, really, really nice. And I'm so looking forward to getting to know more about your communities and your senior centers through this project. I think when it comes down to it, we can show not only what senior centers have needed, but what they can do when you give them a little bit of support, a little bit of funding. And Laura and I, anticipate we want pictures at the end of this if it's something cool.
Yeah.
And we want to do a senior center. We want to go on the
We're gonna do a
road, and we
tour.
want to see some of the tour. We want to tour some of your outdoor patios and see some of your new dishwashers, whatever. I don't know. All right. With that, ladies, gentlemen, everyone, beautiful people, I'm going to say thank you. Laura, thank you very much. Please communicate with us via the State Unit on Aging email. I cannot reiterate that enough. I appreciate that people are reaching out. I just know that I'm going to copy that email if you reach out to me directly, but Laura and I we're looking at that together. And so if one of us is out or can't, like I was out all last week and Laura monitored the email, we both want to be providing technical assistance or be available. So, all right. Beautiful. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. Laura?
Thank you.
We good?
Hey, Claire, can you hang on? I just want to make
Of
sure.
course, I'll hang on. Sure. Everyone else say goodbye. I'll stay on. I'll stop the recording. Thank you, everyone.